In this video, we will learn how to consume a promise, and in this case, we will consume the promise that was returned by the fetch function. So let's now implement the getCountryData function. But of course, this one's using a promise. So get country data. And so again, here we pass in a country. And then here, we want this fetch function with the country then. So making this as a template letter again. And then country. And as we already know, calling this fetch function like this, so will then immediately return a promise. So as soon as we start the request, and at the beginning, promise of course still pending because the asynchronous task of getting the data is still running in the background. So just as we learned in the last video, now of course at a certain point, the promise will then be settled and either in a fulfilled or in a rejected state. But for now, let's assume success. So assume that the promise will be fulfilled and then we have a value available to work with. And so handle this fulfilled state, we can then use the then method that is available on all promises, just like that. So again, this here will return a promise, and on all the promises, we can call the then method. Now into the then method, we need to pass a callback function that we want to execute it as soon as the promise is actually fulfilled. So as soon as the result is available, so a function, and then this function will actually receive one argument. One it's called by JavaScript, and that argument is the resulting value of the fulfilled promise. So let me call a response here, because this is a response of a just call in this case. Alright, that's it. So this is how we actually handle a fulfilled promise. But now let's actually do something with the response here. And as always, I start by logging it to the console. But of course, we also need to call this function here. And so here we now get the response indeed, and even the type of this object is actually called a response. Let's get rid of this here for a second. So we have a clear output here. And so here indeed, we have a couple of things about the response itself. For example, here to data code and headers. But anyway, what we're actually interested in is the data itself. So that data is in the response body here. So let's click here just to see. And as we see, the body is basically this readable string. So actually we cannot yet really look at the data here. So in order to be able to actually read this data from the body, so we need to call the JSON method on the response. So JSON is the method that is available on all responses of the fetch method. So what I mean is this. So response.json. So again, the JSON method here is a method that is available on all the response object that is coming from the fetch function. So all of the result values, and indeed this response here is in fact is a result value, and so therefore it doesn't have the JSON method attached to it. Now the problem here is that this JSON function itself is actually also an asynchronous function. So what that means is that it will return a new promise, and I really don't know why it was implemented like this, but this is just how it works. So anyway, what we need to do now here is to actually return this promise here, because remember this here will be new promise, and so now we need to handle this promise as well. And so the way we do that is to call another thing right here. So we need another callback function. This time let's call it data. And for now, let's log it here to the console. Let's give a save just to see if it's work. Yeah, here it is. So here we are back to having the same data that we already had before, but this time use a promise or actually two promises. So let's recap what happened here. In the first part here, I think it's pretty straightforward, which is this fetch function here returning a promise, and then we handle that promise using the then method. But then to actually read the data from the response, we need to call the JSON method on that response object. Now this itself will also return a promise, and so if we then return that promise from this method, basically all of this become a new promise itself. And so since this is a promise, we can then again call the then method on that, and so then again we have a callback, and this time we can get access to the data because the result value of this promise here is going to be the data itself. So basically the data that we are looking for, which is this one right here. And so now all we have to do is render country data of 0. And so here it is. So we just did the same thing as before by using promises. And if we didn't have all of this console log here, we could actually simplify this a lot. So let me just copy it so that we get to keep this version as well. So but then we can create a highly simplified version as well. So getting rid of this console log, this one as well. And then I go to transform this here to arrow functions. And you see that indeed it still works.